Good morning. This is going to be a speech about communication technology, the way we use mobile phones in the modern day, and whether or not we've really gone off phone calls, whether or not these have been replaced by messaging apps such as WhatsApp. Good morning. It's hardly breaking news if I tell you that in 2018, an Ofcom study revealed that nowadays people are addicted to their smartphones but are somewhat repelled by the idea of making or taking voice calls. In general, people just prefer to text than call these days. Does this mean the death of conversation? Does this mean we don't even know how to talk anymore? People are actually afraid to pick up the phone. Well, not quite, but conversation is shifting. The way we converse with people and the pace at which we exchange messages is changing. If you look at the statistics in 2017, it was the first time when the number of voice calls made in the UK actually fell, because previously more and more people were buying mobile phones, and therefore the number of calls being made in the UK, and because the economy was growing and everything, the number of calls kept on increasing. But in 2017, for the first time, that number dropped. People are not communicating less, but they're communicating less by voice call. And conversely, internet addiction continues to grow. Nowadays, more than 3/4 of British adults own a smartphone. The exact figure is 78%. And you won't be surprised to hear that we tend to check them on average every 12 minutes. If you think about your own mobile phone usage, it's not difficult to imagine that 12 minutes could easily pass before you have a look to see if you have any messages. Certain times of day, that could be more often. You might check every few minutes if you're particularly, every couple of minutes if you're really waiting on a message. And in total, if you look at the number of hours a week we spend online via our mobile phones, we actually spend 24 hours a week. That's a whole day, 1 out of 7 days we spend on our phone on the internet. And much of that time is spent on modern types of communication such as WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. And sometimes we use standard text messages. So this does mean that just people have gotten out of the habit of talking on the phone. But it would be hard to say that people feel less connected because they're still communicating. Personally, I really enjoy talking on the phone. I like talking to people. If I had to text all the time, I would find it extremely dull and irritating. It's tedious. It takes longer to write a message than it does just to say it on the phone. I think I'm one of very few people that really does make an effort to continue making phone calls. I'll tend to skip the texting and call up someone to make an arrangement to meet up, or just to catch up if I haven't seen someone in a while. But many people nowadays only really talk to their mum on the phone. And when it comes to organising things with friends, they will tend to text. Interestingly, nowadays with the use of WhatsApp and its clever voice message function, many people have ended up adapting and sending a voice note, but then still continuing to have a conversation. So they'll record a few seconds of voice note and someone else will reply with another voice note. So it's just as if you're talking on the phone, but you're really waiting for your turn and only replying when you've listened to the entire message from the other person. This does mean that the chunks of conversation, each person's turn, sometimes takes longer, because when you're talking on the phone, you might only speak for a few seconds before the other person replies. But if you do this WhatsApp voice notes conversation, then you could record a whole minute of explanation and the person would have to listen to it before responding. So that's quite an interesting adaptation in communication. It means that people really have to listen and take in more information before responding or interrupting. Perhaps it's a good thing because it reduces people's ability to interrupt one another. I think many of us can agree that actually leaving a voicemail, as in when you leave something, a voicemail on someone's answering machine or their virtual answering machine on their phone, that's basically died as a concept. If you're leaving someone a voicemail because you called them and they didn't pick up the phone, this means you actually haven't got much consideration for the person at the other end of that, because they have to they have to call up their voicemail, they have to call the number and often wait for the electronic voice to say, you have one message from 07748, etc. And you have to get through all of that before you get to the message. So most people realise that it's not a very efficient way to leave a message these days. Some people forget and they'll still leave you a voicemail which you have to spend time listening to. Personally, I do find it a bit irritating, especially when we have WhatsApp voice notes, which are instantly visible on your phone and you can play, you can even pause them, leave them for later. So I think there's a certain new type of etiquette that we're developing nowadays when it comes to leaving people voicemails or voice notes or text messages. For example, if you know someone is likely to be busy in a meeting or looking after a child, then you should probably think, well, it'll be easier for them to read a text message or WhatsApp message that they can read quickly, rather than leaving them a WhatsApp voice note, which they would have to find, they'd have to leave the meeting to be able to listen to that voice note, or if they're with a child, they'd have to play it while trying to manage the child. Interestingly, many people don't know that you don't have to play WhatsApp voice notes out loud. So quite often people think that you have to press play and then listen to it on speakerphone, which means that they can't listen to their message very easily on a bus or in company with other people. However, recently I realised that if you press play on the voice message on WhatsApp and then put the phone to your ear, it will stop playing it on speakerphone and start playing it as if it's a normal voicemail. I've told this to a few people when I discovered it myself, and they were fascinated because they just hadn't realised that that's what you could do. So for your information, if you do get a voice message and you're in a public place, you don't want to play it out loud, just put your phone to your ear and it will play in private just to you. Fascinating information there. So things have changed, it's true to say. When I was at school, and I'm sure many other people in my generation, we used to spend time at school with our friends and then go home and call them in the evening and spend hours on the phone. But at the time, every minute was itemised, as in often phone bills were charged per minute. So you could quite often get in trouble for talking on the phone to a friend or a boy that you wanted to chat up. And sometimes I remember getting billed for a certain number of minutes I'd spent on the phone. And then later on, when we started getting the internet with a dial-up connection, my mother used to charge me and my brother per minute of internet usage because she didn't want us to rack up huge bills. She wanted us to realise the value of this new technology. So she charged us per minute. Arguably slightly harsh, but it did make us understand. So nowadays people tend to say that smartphones and texting has led to sort of dumber conversation, less intellectual conversation, because you're just texting back emojis. But I wouldn't say that's true per se. We've just adapted, and it has opened up a whole new world of communication. Emojis are actually very useful and very efficient. People have developed a whole new world of communication, a whole new language of emojis. So when they first came out, I did see them as quite silly, but nowadays I think I've adapted and find them quite efficient, and they can be quite humorous. You can express something quite quickly and efficiently with a few emojis. And one really important change in the way people have started communicating nowadays is group chats, WhatsApp groups, for example. It is true that compared to types of communication that we used to use, WhatsApp group conversations are an extremely efficient way of communicating with a group, and it's a very nice way of keeping in touch. You don't always have to meet up, for example, with your whole family or your whole group of friends to be able to keep up to date with what they're doing. People can send a little picture of what they're doing, and people can reply. Whereas before you had to call each different person and explain something to them, but nowadays you can explain it to everyone at once, and they can all react extremely efficiently. So I think there are many advantages to modern communication. As I mentioned, the WhatsApp voice notes are very efficient. You can easily leave people a message. The group chats are very handy. But I do think it's very important to keep picking up the phone and really calling people to catch up and having those standard conversations back and forth. And really, I don't know what people are afraid of when they say they're afraid to pick up the phone. They're still having conversations in real life, and it's really no different. When you pick up the phone, you just have a conversation. So I really hope that people will continue to talk to each other on the phone, because there is a lot of value in that type of communication that we could lose if we get too stuck in the routine of texting all the time. Thank you very much for listening.